Greetings, all lovers of lore and legend, whether student, teacher, parent, teller of tales, or a semi-spherical stumper of sphinxes.
The Great Tales is a podcast about myths and legends from both inside and outside the Christian tradition, and we come to you live twice a month to talk about these great stories that Christians have been reading, passing on for centuries, and sometimes even longer than that, believe it or not.
So last time we introduced Oedipus by discussing a medieval Breton lay, the Lay of Sir Diggory, or Diggory, which gives a happy ending to this tale. And today we're not going to do that.
No, it's going to be a very sad summer, I think, actually. I don't like heat, so it seems appropriate to just go ahead and just wallow in it for a while, I think.
That's right.
Yeah. Today we're going to dive straight into the Oedipus story by looking at Sophocles' play Oedipus the King, also known as Oedipus Rex, not
Yes.
Oedipus Tex.
Also, by the way, originally known as Oedipus Tyrannus.
Tyrannus, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
And this play contains what is probably the most familiar version of kind of the base story of the whole Oedipus cycle. Or you don't want me to use legendarium, do you?
No, I mean but it is part of a kind of a larger heroic cycle concerning ancient cities, and in particular the city of Thebes, the Bronze Age collapse, all those things. So this is part of our what I've decided we're calling a hot Theban summer. So we're going to be spending a lot of time for the next couple of months talking about Oedipus, his family, his blighted city, and then eventually we're going to actually move on to talking about some the things that happen in the successive generations there in the city of Thebes, which is a very important, actually kind of a prelude to the events of the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Yeah. I mean, hot Theban summer, to me, it sounds very 80s. I mean, I know that you weren't really around for most of the 80s.
No.
But I was, and it very much has that kind of vibe to it, as you kids would say these days.
Yes, indeed.
So, yes.
Indeed.
So let us imagine ourselves in 429 BC. And Sophocles himself takes the stage in Athens at the theater of Dionysus at the event called the Dionysia, the great annual Athenian festival of the god Dionysus, which included a drama competition. He's about to introduce the play which Aristotle in his Poetics called the most perfect tragedy. And yet, sadly, it will win only second prize that year, beaten out by some nephew of Aeschylus. So, Deacon Seraphim,
That's right.
tell us all about Sophocles, our great playwright.
So, in the annals of classical Athens, there are many figures crowned with laurels, steeped in the memory of gods and men, and among them, many great poets and dramatists. And probably one of the definitely one of the greatest of these figures is Sophocles, a man who was a poet, was actually also a priest, and also a great tragedian. There we go. Tragedian.
A tragedy guy.
Yeah, tragedy guy, whose voice still echoes down to us through the broken marble of the great theater to us today. So he was born in Colonus long before it was became famous, mostly because of him. That is, Oedipus at Colonus will be the third installment of his trilogy, which he actually reads, by the way, to prove that he is in fact compos mentis as an old man. His sons are trying to sort of get his estate from him, and so they take him to court to basically prove, dad's really kind of old now, and so he reads his final Oedipus play as sort of proof that, no, look, I still got it.
Wow.
So, fun little bit of
we should have some of our our political leaders perhaps consider.
Listen.
In ancient Greek.
I really kind of feel like if you can't compose a good tragedy in ancient Greek meter, then you shouldn't be allowed to hold public office or lead an army. I think that's reasonable.
Agreed.
So this is actually one of the things that Sophocles will do. So he's the son. He's born in 497, so the end of the 5th century BC. He is the son of a prosperous armorer by the name of Sophocles. And his youth kind of coincides with the twilight of an old aristocratic order and then the birth of Athenian democracy. So he grows up being shaped by Homer and Hesiod, but also by the birth pangs of the polis of Athens. So he becomes famous at the age of 30 when he defeats Aeschylus, the veteran dramatist Aeschylus, in the competition of the Great Dionysia, which I'll talk about here in a moment. And he tells a story about how Cimon returns home from war with the bones of Theseus, how the city, swollen with patriotic pride, crowns Sophocles as a favorite son. So like all of this stuff is happening right at the moment of when Athens is kind of reaching its peak. And over the course of his long life, which will span the Persian Wars, the rise of Pericles, the bitter Peloponnesian War, and of course a devastating plague that is part of the backdrop of this play, Sophocles will write more than 120 dramas. Only 7 of them survive to us today.
That's so sad.
Modern,
and that underlines.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the big problem of the ancient world, is that we have this much
right
of all the texts that were written and even known and talked about. And
yeah, the estimate is something like 5%.
Yeah,
of what was written in the ancient world survives to us today.
Crazy.
You know, we don't have, you know, the other 113 plays, but we do have like shopping lists from, you know, Bronze Age Mesopotamia. So you know, it's a little random. It's a little random, you know, based on, you know, complaints about the quality of copper ingots and so on. You know, it's a little random what survives. So among those 7 that survive are, of course, Antigone, Electra, and Oedipus Tyrannus, or Oedipus the King. Unlike, let's say that Sophocles in some ways improves upon the legacy of Aeschylus. He really deepens the art of dramatic irony. His characters are not just the mouthpieces of cosmic justice. They're human, fragile, noble, torn between the conflict of duties and, you know, the desire on the one hand, duty on the other hand, and then also haunted by the terrible clarity of hindsight. So Sophocles, by the way, served Athens not only as a poet, he was also a general, a diplomat, and the very first Athenian priest of Asclepius. And in fact, when the cult of Asclepius was first brought to Athens, Sophocles was chosen to be basically his home was chosen as the site of the first shrine to Asclepius, and him as the first priest. And so this led to his sort of surname in Athens, which was the receiver, as in the one who had received the image, the cult of Asclepius, into his home. And so so he dies around 406 BC, and was mourned by the passing of the entire city. But if his life is marked by service and civic duty, and by the way, I think his epitaph was something along the lines of, I'm trying to remember this now, but it's something along the lines of, "So passes Sophocles, he lived a long time and nothing bad ever happened to him," which is you know, that's about as much as anybody can ask for, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, so he's got a life that's marked by civic service and civic duty. He was actually a general of Athens under Pericles, again. And the reason that he was chosen was because he was a great playwright. And obviously, if somebody is a great playwright, they will also be a good general of the army. So again, this goes back to my initial premise that this should be a requirement for public office. So when we're talking about Greek tragedy, especially in the Athenian tradition, which is really the only one that survives to us, we're talking about something called the Dionysia. Technically, there are 2 Dionysia. There's the city Dionysia and the country Dionysia. But the big one, the city Dionysia, is it is a pagan festival. It is a part of the mystery cult. This is in honor of Dionysius Eleutherius, who is the liberator god who sort of liberates you from the cycle of time, right? He walks among the vines and madness, and this is a festival of ecstasy and masks. And so each spring, as the sailing season begins in Athens, citizens and foreigners alike throng to the streets of the city to behold a spectacle that is, it would be weird to, I mean, how do I say this? it's a religious festival, but it is also a theatrical festival, because in ancient Greece, these things go together.
Yeah. I mean, folks have probably heard, well, ancient Greek theater was part of a religious thing. Well, this is what that means. This is what we're talking about. And when we say a festival, it's not like, you go down and there's like here in the Lehigh Valley, we have Music Fest, we have Celtic Classic, we have these various kinds of, just go and watch a bunch of concerts.
Yeah.
That's not what it means by festival. There's sacrifices. There's, of course, because this is Dionysius, so there's a whole lot of drinking.
There's drinking, and then the sort of the whole sort of point of this is to the Dionysian cult is to escape the. So there's an endless cycle of time. That the ancient Greeks, this is how they conceive of time. They actually inherit it from the ancient Babylonians. And if you want to know more about this, you can come to the Lord of Spirits conference. Tickets are now on sale, where certain deacon will be talking a lot about time and astrology.
That's true.
But and so the idea is that the cycle of time is endless and it's inescapable, and everything that your life is doomed to, is already laid out for you. The universe is deterministic, and so in this sense, we're sort of trapped. So what the Dionysian cult offers is a way to escape that. In the prison, the hell of this endless repetition, through basically losing your personhood in ecstasy and in these kind of orgiastic rites, right? Where you would you'd get really, really drunk, a lot of other things would happen, and you would kind of like disassociate for a little bit, and it's like a way of kind of escaping, not just on an individual level, but actually as the whole city. And so you'll notice that it's
a rave.
Yeah, it's kind of a rave. I mean, the thing to understand is that this is we have to know that this is the context of these plays, because these plays are about this thing, about the fact that the cycle of time, that fate cannot be escaped.
Yeah.
So this is like a civic ritual in which the whole city can kind of contemplate this and experience catharsis through seeing the inevitable human tragedy play out in somebody else's life at kind of a safe distance. Yeah, sorry, what were you going to say, Father?
I was going to say, I mean, it kind of raises, and we'll revisit this, but maybe listeners should be thinking about this as we go through this story. Is Oedipus in any way in control of his own fate?
Right.
What kind of choices does he have? Right?
Yeah.
And it's not actually
totally
easy. It's not an easy question to answer in this play, and this is part of why Sophocles is so brilliant and so remembered for this particular play.
Yeah. So the Great Dionysia takes place over a course of several days. It begins with sacrifices. They would sacrifice a bull, sprinkle the blood around the theater there, and this is the theater of Dionysius, which is carved onto the southern slope of the Athenian Acropolis. It could hold as many as maybe 15,000 citizens.
And you can go there still.
Yeah,
you can still go there. Yeah.
So they would choose judges by lot, from among the basically what we would consider to be the aristocrats, that is the free men of the city. And, ancient Athens had democracy, if we understand that democracy is for land-owning males.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So they would choose actually the judges by lot, and in this atmosphere, which is heavy with incense and wine and expectation and ecstasy and all these different things, as part of towards the very end of the festivities, that was when they would put on the plays. And initially, each playwright would offer a trilogy of tragedies. There's no comedy at this initially. A trilogy of tragedies followed by something that was called a satyr play. And it's satyr, not satire. And at this point, I should just mention, we're talking about Oedipus, we're talking about ancient Greece, parental advisory should be implied.
It's true.
I guess pun intended, I don't know. But anyway, sorry, I'm sorry.
Wow.
Yeah, woof.
Going straight for it.
Yep, going straight for it. So the satire, I almost did it. The Satyr Plays would be plays that would be on a mythological theme. So they would usually have to do with mythological figures. I think the only one that survives, maybe in its entirety, I could be wrong about this, but I think it's the story of Odysseus and the Cyclops, actually. But anyway, yeah. So they're usually plays about monsters, other mythological figures. I know that we have an account of one that is about Apollo sending his servants to look for his cattle, and they discover the infant. Hermes is another example. But what sort of defines this Satyr Plays is that there's a chorus, and maybe Father Andrew, in a moment, you can explain what is a chorus. In the context of ancient Hellenic tragedy, but that they would have a chorus of people dressed up like satyrs, that is, like goat men, with costumes with, shall we say, extremely exaggerated anatomy.
Yes, I mean, this is part of why Tolkien was so unhappy with C.S. Lewis with Mr. Tumnus.
So throughout the play, the Satyr Play, these figures who are, closely identified with Pan and Dionysius and all these, and Bacchus and, all these ecstatic figures, they would be, as this serious play about the gods, like mythological stuff is supposed to be going on, they're making basically incredibly bawdy jokes. It's the least helpful chorus ever. And this is the very last part of the festival, and basically it's kind of like it's a relief. So like you have like all these tragedies that are presented, and then you get the relief, and you get the sort of like, well, we're all kind of doomed anyway. We may as well make some fart jokes. And
I mean, it's the opposite. Isn't it the opposite of the way that things go now? Where like if you've got an opening act, the comedian is like the opening act. Yeah. You have someone, to loosen them up.
You got to break the ice.
Yeah. But
to be fair,
it's the opposite.
I suspect people were like actually pretty loose by this time,
Absolutely.
So to speak.
Yes.
Anyway, so Oedipus, so several days, sacrifices, processions, something called a dithyramb, which is like hymns to Dionysius, and then finally the competition. So you have each tragedian offers a trilogy of plays, followed by the satire play or the Satyr Play. And then, and so Oedipus the King is likely performed at one of these festivals during the late 420s. The precise date is kind of up for grabs, you could say, but there's a strong argument to be made, and I think we're going to actually read a letter from a listener here about this here in a moment. But there's a strong argument to be made that it was first debuted in 429 BC, just after the Athenian plague, when the city is reeling under the weight of its own hubris and mortality. So Athens has been undergoing like a kind of huge expansion. They've been basically building an empire, and then they're struck by this devastating plague. And you can sort of see how, in that context, the story of a man cursed by prophecy, blind to the truth, undone by his own kind of inquisitiveness, would have struck a really deep chord with people. The chorus of the Theban elders. So in this tragedy, the chorus is the elders of the city of Thebes. They're lamenting disease and ruin. They might well have echoed cries from the very streets beyond the theater. But whatever the date, we know this: Sophocles, Oedipus, Tyrannus did not win first prize.
It's an irony, I mean, in a play that's all about irony.
The really ironic thing is that we don't have the play that won first prize.
Yes,
that did not survive.
That's so great. I love that as well.
I think in some ways you could say perhaps the play is too subtle. Its construction is too severe. Its horror is too refined. Who knows? But time, as the ultimate judge, has preserved this play to us, which Aristotle, as you mentioned, praises as being the very model of the form of tragedy. Tolkien, by the way, said tragedy is the highest form of drama, just as eucatastrophe is the highest form of the fairy tale. I think we read that quote last episode. So you could sort of say, if tragedy is the highest form of drama and Oedipus Tyrannus is the greatest tragedy, then it's the greatest play that has ever been written, at least according to Aristotle, who, to be fair, a lot of plays were written after he died. But this one holds up. This one holds up.
It does. It hold up.
It has a lot of features that I think people who don't understand the ancient world well would be surprised at. A very tight plot, very slow burning irony, big shattering reversal at the end, an actual catastrophe at the end. I mean, this is part of you can actually understand maybe some of the comments that Tolkien is making about eucatastrophe, unless you understand how catastrophe strikes in a drama, which is not a drama in a tragedy, which is not just everything's bad from the get-go. It's that there's the slow build until finally everything comes falling down, everything shatters right at the end.
Yeah.
And so that's where we're going to pick up tonight, Father Andrew.
Yeah.
And at this point,
you mentioned about the chorus. I don't think we actually included any of the lines from the chorus in this, because I was trying to be very concise with the lines we're going to actually look at. But everyone should know, since actually this is our first piece of Greek drama.
Yeah.
That a chorus is usually a group, but sometimes it can be sort of a single figure, and their job is they're not exactly the narrator.
Right.
But they kind of function that way in some ways. They offer commentary. They let you know what's going on. They let you know how does the city feel about what's going on. It's sort of the vox populi.
The tricky thing is that the chorus is also the way that I would try to explain them is to say that they're the sort of the mediator between the audience and the play.
Yeah.
And in that sense, they sort of break the fourth wall, or they sort of draw the audience in behind the fourth wall. So the chorus talks to you, the audience, but the chorus also actually interacts with and talks to people in the drama.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of they have this sort of weird, there's not a good equivalent of this usually in modern film or anything like that.
Well,
usually when it is, it's just sort of played for laughs.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that is that we have become so kind of dedicated to sort of this immersive realism in terms of our storytelling, that having a narrator, a figure, or someone like that kind of on stage, it becomes a trope. I would say, like, there is actually a show that occurs to me that's a modern show which sort of plays with this idea, and that's Into the Woods by Stephen Sondheim.
Oh, I thought you were going to say She-Hulk. All right, sorry, continue. She-Hulk in the comics, by the way, famously breaks the fourth wall.
Yes, that's true. Well, and in the recent TV series as well.
Yeah, I didn't watch that.
It's okay. It's okay. It's not great. But yeah, in Into the Woods, you have this character, I think he's not called the baker's father. Now I'm trying to remember the name of the character, but he's basically the narrator. He's this old man who's singing.
It's the Baker's Dozen. It's actually a heist film.
Whatever.
No,
but he both narrates what's going on, but then he also interacts. He's a character that's really an important, pivotal person within the scope of the play. Now, the chorus in Greek drama is almost never pivotal. They're never making things happen, right? They do provide this kind of interface, as you said, but they're not usually the ones making things happen. Right. But they kind of let you know how to feel about what's going on in many cases. And that's why it's often, like you said, in this case, the group is sort of the elders of Thebes. And in fact, when the play opens, so we're going to begin this now. When the play opens, Oedipus steps out onto the stage, and he's talking to the chorus.
Yes,
is what's going on. Who are there supplicating him because this plague has happened. And this is brilliant on the part of Sophocles, because the people of Athens are actually experiencing plague or the aftermath of it, and it's like this scene could be happening there. And sort of in some ways explains where the plague. Well, we'll get to that. Okay, we'll get to all that.
Yeah.
So I want to just begin with the very first lines of the play, and so this is Oedipus himself speaking. "Oh, my children, the new blood of ancient Thebes, why are you here, huddling at my altar, praying before me, your branches wound in wool? Our city reeks with the smoke of burning incense, rings with cries for the healer and wailing for the dead. I thought it wrong, my children, to hear the truth from others, messengers. Here I am myself. You all know me. The world knows my fame. I am Oedipus. So, I mean, look at that, right? The smoke, the city reeks with the smoke of burning incense. This is in the middle of the Dionysia. Everyone's like, it's literally, this is a brilliant thing that Sophocles has done. It's a very you are here kind of moment.
Yeah.
So I wanted to focus especially on those last couple lines. Like, you all know me. The world knows my fame. I am Oedipus. On some level, this is kind of prophetic because it's true, right? What Sophocles has written, although maybe at the time it wouldn't have been as obvious, although the story would have been known. But Oedipus, his fame is in many ways established by this play, that we're now reading it 2,500 almost years later. I mean, that's just, it's incredible. So what is it about this? Why does the world know his fame? Why don't we just shove this horrible story deep down in some kind of Freudian box, right? And leave it just submerged. Why bring this out? You know, what's going on? I mean, what is your take on why are we interested in this story?
So within the, I just want to point out a little bit of irony here in the opening lines. So in the paragraph that follows, Oedipus pulls one of the old priests to his feet and says, "Speak up, old man. Your years, your dignity, you should speak for the others. Why here and kneeling would praise upon you so? Some sudden fear, some strong desire? You can trust me. I'm ready to help. I'll do anything. I would be blind to misery, not to pity my people kneeling at my feet." So obviously, you know, blindness. Everybody,
a lot of jokes about that.
Yeah, everybody take a drink every time blindness comes up in the play.
Right.
Please don't actually do that. You'll die of alcohol poisoning before the episode ends. But
please do not reenact the Dionysia as you're listening to this episode of The Great Tale.
Okay, so the irony here is the reason Oedipus in the play is saying, "I'm Oedipus. You all know me. The world knows my fame. I'm Oedipus." What he's saying is, this is in the context of, I'm here to solve your problems.
Yeah, he's the king.
He's the king. And Oedipus is a person who sort of has the reputation of being able to solve the problems. The last time that Thebes had a serious problem, the Sphinx, which we'll talk about in a moment.
Oh yeah.
Oedipus is the person who solved the riddle, solved the problem. Now he's being presented with another riddle, with another problem, and he's saying, "You guys know I'm the guy that solves problems." So that's the kind of fame that he thinks he's talking about. Yeah, and then, of course, the irony is that the thing that he's famous for, and would have been famous for before this play, I just want to point out in case it's unclear to the audience, that this is not, Sophocles is not inventing a story. He's telling a story, but this story has been around for centuries, actually, before Sophocles. This is one of the stories that comes out of basically what we now call the Bronze Age collapse, which has to do across the Aegean with the collapse of several powerful city-states like Thebes and Troy. And so this is one of the stories that's come out of that time, and Sophocles is just telling it in basically the definitive way. Nobody will ever tell this story as well.
Yeah, I mean, so as you said, he doesn't invent the story. When he says the world knows my fame, we know his fame in many ways because of Sophocles.
Right.
But when he comes out and says, "I'm Oedipus," probably most of the audience in their inebriated state would have said, "Oh, we know this story."
I think people are probably going, "Ooh," kind of like that, probably.
Like, oh, it's an Oedipus story.
Yeah. So,
you know, it's just, it would be like, I think for us, it would be like if someone came out and said, "I am Arthur, King of the Britons."
Right. Yeah.
We would be like, "Oh, okay. I know about Arthur. I know, about the sword. I know." Yes. Yeah. It's that sort of thing. So, I mean, spoilers. I think the statute of limitations is up on a play that's 2,500 years old. Probably. This is a play about a man who kills his father and marries his mother. These are these are big taboos.
Yeah, the biggest, basically.
Yeah, I mean, for us as Christians, of course, these are unthinkable acts. You would never, it's horrifying to even think of that. But it's interesting that even for pagans, for Greek pagans, these are bad. And what I want to explore for a second is, why tell this kind of story? Why about these big taboos? And like also kind of lurking in the background is Zeus, who does some of the same garbage and is the most high god of their pantheon. Like, I mean, is it okay for the gods and not okay for humans? I mean, it kind of does land there.
Short answer, yes, by the way.
Right.
Answer,
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Zeus is the worst.
Yeah.
In case anybody thought, that Zeus would come out looking even slightly good on the Great Tales, that will never happen.
So just wait till 7 against Thebes. But so this is not a comedy, right? And a comedy comedy will eventually be introduced later on to the Dionysia. And of course, comedy brings in the famous Deus Ex Machina, which means God out of the machine. It was literally there would be a device that would like raise, or lower sometimes a figure playing a god like onto the stage, and they would sort of show up and like fix everything right before like all the tragic stuff happens. They'd sort of like, boom, show up, God hands, fix everything. Everybody's
God
happy
hands.
Now. And that's
is that like jazz hands, but from a god?
Yeah, exactly. I think they did this. I think this is in the instructions in the old place, but pretty sure. Or that was Bugs Bunny. I'm forgetting, but a famous trickster god of early Americana. But yeah, so this is a tragedy. So in the genre of the tragedy, which again is the original genre and certainly the original thing that's happening in the Dionysia, no one is coming to save you, right? And that's kind of the point of all of this, is that the reason that you need Dionysius, right, is because you need liberation from this inevitable cycle from which you cannot be free.
So, I mean,
and so in this sense, well, so to answer your question, Father, I think the reason the story holds so much water and has kind of endured is because it tells one very true and very accurate part of the human story and of the human experience, which is the what seems to be the inevitability of the tragic human condition. Now, we know, we have the hope of the resurrection, but that's a Christian virtue. And actually, in a world right now, I mean, you could say, as we're recording this, there's like a lot of inevitability that seems to be kind of unfolding in the world right now in terms of wars and rumors of wars, let us say, right? Yeah. And the sort of like the sense that some of this stuff is just like totally inescapable, and hey, it actually doesn't matter who you vote for or what you do or what you post online, whatever. This like everything is just going to happen the way it's going to happen, and you actually kind of like you can see how it feels hopeless. And I think that very often in human experience, that has been kind of the feeling, and I think that the stories like this help us sort through that. And obviously, that's not the whole story. That's actually why we started this whole thing with, a Christian fairy tale version of this story, right? It's not the whole story. It's not the end of the story.
Yeah.
And for them, the best thing that they could sort of offer is catharsis and forgetfulness.
Yeah, I think a big piece of what's going on here and why these kinds of stories endure, although I think that this is still one of the most compelling,
of course,
ones of this kind, really. And by this kind, I don't mean stories where a guy kills his dad and marries his mom. That's not what I mean. But rather a story that's about something awful like this, something that is at the depth of human misery and taboo and so forth, is that it allows us to experience it. And I mean, as you said, within this Dionysian context, it's an experience that takes you away from the awfulness, probably in the difficulty of your own life. So there's some level of just escape that's going on, but it's not just escape, like, let me forget about this for a while, right? It's not like,
Right.
It's not that. It's a way to experience the awful. And I want to use that word in the older sense of awful. Like, we now use it to mean something that's really bad. And of course, I do mean that in this context. But awful means that it is something that makes you be full of awe, right? So awe-inspiring actually doesn't quite do the same thing that awful used to.
Yeah.
And I mentioned, I mean, one of my favorite little bits about how language changes is that I can't remember who it was, but there was some famous writer or someone like this who went to Paris and saw, Notre Dame there in Paris. And he came away from it saying that it was awful, amusing, and artificial. Have you heard about this?
It is all of those things.
Right. And he was complimenting it.
Yes.
Yeah, he meant that it was full of awe. Amusing meant that it was inspiring, right? It was like a muse. And artificial means it was well crafted.
You're right. A work of artifice. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But so I mean awful in this older sense, that you stand kind of dumbstruck at this. And I think it's good for human beings to experience that in this displaced way. And I think that this is part of what theater can do in a way that, I don't know. I mean, I think films can on some level, other kinds of art can on some level, maybe, but in a very different way. There's something about theater. There's something I recall. I recall when I was in high school, and my high school English class, I think it was between my junior and senior year. So I went to high school in Northern Ohio. And at that time, for a number of years in a row, this one particular literature teacher would take the class, anybody who wanted to go, on an extended field trip during the summer. And we would go to Stratford, Ontario, which is not that far away. So if you're in Northern Ohio, you drive up to Detroit and then across, the river to into Ontario. And in Stratford, Ontario, which of course is named after Stratford-on-Avon in England, there's a big Shakespeare festival, and there are multiple theaters there that are doing Shakespeare plays and sometimes other plays too. And when we went, we saw The Tempest, and we also saw Uncle Vanya, which is a Chekhov play. And I recall watching The Tempest. And in fact, interestingly enough, the same actor starred in both of those, a guy named Alan Scarf, who showed up in a number of episodes of Star Trek and also was in The Empire Strikes Back. But anyway, so I remember watching him play Prospero in The Tempest. And there's this moment in The Tempest where, so Prospero's this wizard who controls this island and
right.
and controls the wind and the waves and all this kind of stuff. And there's this point where he decides he's going to give up magic and he's going to leave, and he breaks his staff and he says, "I'll break my staff." And the way that they played it in this production is the whole time he has the staff behind his neck and he's got his arms hanging up over it, kind of like a rack. And it's almost this sort of crucifix sort of image, right? And then when he says, "I'll break my staff," he breaks it over the back of his neck. And I recall, like, there's no sound effects, there's no lighting effects. It's just the power of his voice, like 10, 15 feet away from us. And I recall very clearly, I mean, this is like 30 some years ago for me. I still recall when he broke that staff, when he says, "I'll break my staff," and then crack, the audience gasped. And I mean, this to me is an emblem of exactly the way that theater can work.
Yeah.
That it was a perfect connection between the actor and the audience in a way that you cannot do on film. You cannot do on television. You cannot do it in a book. And even though I love all of these other formats, and you know, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about all this stuff, there's something about theater. And I think it's really important to underline this, that when you've got this crowd that they're smelling the incense, they've been doing drugs, all this kind of stuff, they are primed, frankly. I mean, we're joking about this to some extent, but they are primed to have an experience. They expect to have an experience. They're ready to go down deep. And he steps out and says, I am Oedipus.
Right. Yeah.
I imagine, you know, even though the play has just started, probably there would be some murmuring, you know, this connection immediately. And remember, these people don't watch TV. They don't have movies. The only music that they ever hear is live. This is a very, very different world. I know I'm kind of going on about this, but I think it's important to have this sense so that we can begin to recover a little bit of this, a little bit of the immediacy of this of this moment that people are experiencing with this. And I think what that does is, I think if you don't remember that context, if you just sort of read this play or something, you might just go, wow, that is weird. But the sort of the spine-tingling electricity of being present when all of this is going on.
I actually have something I want to say to that, but I'm going to save it for the end because I want to get into that. But when we do our concluding thoughts, I really enjoyed what you just said, and I want to tack onto it, but I'll save it for the end. So let's move on. Yeah, I know we've kind of gone a lot here at the beginning. No, it's great.
But let's move on. So the next lines are from one of the priests, and why don't you go ahead and read that for us?
Thebes is dying. A blight on the fresh crops and the rich pastures. Cattle sicken and die, and the women die in labor, children stillborn, and the plague. The fiery god of fever hurls down on the city, his lightning slashing through us, raging plague and all its vengeance, devastating the house of Cadmus, and black death luxuriates in the raw, wailing miseries on Thebes.
So yeah, this priest lets us know what's going on.
Yeah. So it's worth noting the two the house of Cadmus, because Cadmus is the founder of Thebes. You know, he kills the Hydra and sows the dragon's teeth, and they grow into the people of Thebes. It's worth noting the two kinds of things that are going wrong. One is plague, but the other is infertility. Infertility, you know, which is something which is closely associated with incest, right, in the ancient world. That is women are dying in labor, children are being stillborn. Right, there's something has gone wrong with not just with life in general, which is the plague, right? Which is that's the punishment which is connected to the murder of the king, but then also something wrong with life at its source.
Yeah,
which is the punishment that is connected with the incest.
You know, I'm suddenly reminded. I mean, this is not a Shakespeare podcast, but
it could be, might be eventually.
Hey, yeah, who knows?
Listen, Shakespeare, I just want to be really fair to him. You know, kind of a wasted talent, but he wrote two really good fairy tales, and we should definitely talk about them. So, no, that's not my opinion, but that is Tolkien's. That was kind of always Tolkien's opinion.
Well, I know this is where I'm the good professor is wrong, but you know, but I was reminded though, like for those who know Hamlet. This should echo when you hear something is rotten in the state of Denmark.
Right.
And what is the core sin in Hamlet? Is that the guy who's now the king, you know, he killed his brother and married his sister-in-law. I mean, this is a bit of a remix. Anyways, okay. So yeah, I know we're getting way more excited about this than I actually imagined we would. I think this is going to be a long episode, so we'll get through it. We'll get through it.
No reason it has to be. We can just breeze through something that's 2,500 years old. It's no big deal.
No problem. Yeah, so we actually got, and this was beautiful. We actually got multiple emails related to our last episode, which is great. So we want to hear from everybody.
Actually, yes, please email us at whatever our email address is.
The Great Tales at AncientFaith.com.
There you go. I didn't even.
Yeah, we got some great emails. We're going to talk about one of them here real quick. We got another really beautiful one related to Oedipus, which we're going to save for next time. So Daniel, I don't know if he pronounced it Geoffrey or Jeffrey. He wrote by way of correction because I made a mistake last time, which is I talked about the plague god Apollo as being the one who's throwing this plague down on them because he is the plague god. And, these archer
He's
gods.
The plague god at the beginning of the Iliad, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. But so Daniel very nicely, he wrote in and he said this. He said, I was listening to the first of your Oedipus podcast today, and I want to draw your attention to something in the text of Oedipus Rex. You said that the plague was sent to Thebes by Apollo, as it was sent to the Greeks in the Iliad. And here's where he's very nice. If I could draw your attention to the Parodos, the first appearance of the chorus of Oedipus Rex, lines 151 to 215, you will see that the chorus invokes Apollo, Artemis, Dionysus, and eventually Zeus himself for help against Ares. This is an odd detail because Ares is not otherwise known as a plague sender. It can perhaps be explained by remembering that Oedipus Rex was written in Athens during the Peloponnesian War. It was produced in 429 BC. The previous year, 430 BC, saw the Great Plague ravage the city in the second year of the war, and the connection between war and plague must have been fresh in the Athenian audience's mind. Remember also, since Thebes was an ally of Sparta, Athens was currently at war with Thebes as Oedipus Rex was being performed on the Athenian stage. This, I think, is important context for interpreting the play. Absolutely right, Daniel. Absolutely. And brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you so much for that email. And thank you for the correction. It blossomed into something great, actually.
I will say, to be fair to past Father Andrew, Apollo is kind of, at some points he is kind of actually blamed for the plague as well. So I think it's this sort of Apollo connected to the plague, and then Ares is, of course, Infortuna Major. Like, you never want Ares. Like, the Romans were the only people who liked Ares. They had a whole field for him. But like war, pestilence, death, like, these are things that kind of...
Yeah.
They're things that come together. But
in Athens, you've got the Areopagus. And what is the Areopagus? I mean, the hill, Mars Hill, the Hill of Ares.
Yeah, the Hill of Mars.
It's not because that was a place where he was worshipped. No. That is a place where he was tried, for his crimes, right? Right. He was judged there. And that's why the men of Athens would sit in judgment there, is because this is where even a god was judged.
Yeah.
He's not a good guy.
So I actually want to read a little more of the priest's request for help.
Oh, sure.
If I could, just because I think it would be, it helps us understand what it is why they're coming to Oedipus with their problems, and also like what is the role of the king in the ancient world.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So now we pray to you. You cannot equal the gods. Your children know that, bending at your altar. But we do rate you first of men, both in the common crises of our lives and in face-to-face encounters with the gods. You freed us from the Sphinx. You came to Thebes and cut us loose from the bloody tribute we had paid that harsh, brutal singer. We taught you nothing, no skill, no extra knowledge, till you triumphed. A god was with you, so they say, and we believe it. You lifted up our lives, so now again, Oedipus King, we bend to you, your power. We implore you, all of us on our knees, find us strength. Rescue. Perhaps you've heard the voice of a god, or something from other men. Oedipus, what do you know? The man of experience. You see it every day. His plans will work in a crisis. His first of all. So the thing that people are looking to Oedipus for is like, Oedipus, you've solved our problems in the past, and there's this idea that the king is the person who interfaces between the common people and the gods. So maybe you've talked to the gods, and the gods have told you something they haven't told us. Maybe you know the solution here.
Yeah.
So that's the.
I almost put those lines into the notes. Maybe I just should have, because. Okay. Yeah, I love where, he says essentially, you're not one of the gods, but you're kind of next.
Yeah, well, I mean, kings are at least descended from gods, and they're certainly, of a different order sort of than the normal human beings.
Yeah, which is part of what makes this so tragic.
Right.
Because it's the downfall of someone who's almost a god, or better than man, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, part of the curse is that that Laius has been killed. We're going to talk, obviously, a lot about that. We're going to skip ahead now, and this starts getting discussed because there's an oracle is consulted, like what's going on, and someone says, well, this problem happened. Laius was killed. Laius is the previous king. Right? And so Oedipus speaks to this. And I'm going to just read some of his lines about this. I'm going to skip over a passage in the middle. I'm excerpting here a little bit. By the way, we didn't mention this at the beginning, but we are reading the Robert Fagles translation of this play, and highly recommend it. I would say Dr. Fagles is a friend of the show, of the Great Tales here. We're fans of his
We mean
work.
that in a nice way, not like what you guys mean on Lord of Spirits, though.
That's not what I mean on the
I mean, what I'd say is that Fagles is probably kind of the best thing going in terms of translations of classical epics and poems and things like that right now.
Yep.
His Iliad and Odyssey translation are wonderful.
Great.
I mean, there are other good ones too. But Fagles is one of those rare things that sort of come out recently and immediately, I mean, there's no way to know this, but seems as though it's going to stand the test of time in the sense that it's just really well done. We were talking about this a little bit in the pre-show, which is that part of the reason Fagles translations are so good. So there are a lot of words that are in Greek and Latin, and usually from Greek via Latin, via medieval French into English, etc. Right? But there are a lot of words in Greek and Latin that survive into our language in some way, but almost always those words have a more formal sense than their Anglo-Saxon counterparts.
Yeah.
And so what Fagles does is, so what a lot of translators of classical literature, the mistake that they make is to just sort of like, as a shortcut when they're translating, if they come across a word that has a descendant in modern English, they just use that word. But that word is almost always going to be more formal than the context of the word that they're trying to translate. And so what Fagles does is he uses Anglo-Saxon words as much as possible, which are words that for us are more immediate, they are more earthy.
Yeah.
And I mean, a good example, okay, right? Homicide versus murder.
Yeah. Which feels
homicide.
Which feels deeper to you.
Yeah. Which one feels more personal? Which one feels more immediate? Which one feels like, like homicide is the formal name of a crime, right? But to say murder, that's got a resonance to it. And
well, and it's also, I mean, we won't give any examples, but it's also why, when English speakers want to, shall we say, use colorful language.
Yes.
It's almost all from our Anglo-Saxon heritage.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yes.
Almost all of it. Almost every last four-letter word. So, okay. So the question now is, okay, we need to figure out who murdered Laius. What happened? Who is this? So Oedipus steps out, and of course he kind of puffs himself up a little at the beginning. He says, I will speak out now as a stranger to the story, a stranger to the crime. If I'd been present then, there would have been no mystery, no long hunt without a clue in hand. So now, counted a native Theban years after the murder, to all of Thebes I make this proclamation. If any one of you knows who murdered Laius, the son of Labdacus, I order him to reveal the whole truth to me. Nothing to fear, even if he must denounce himself. Let him speak up, and so escape the brunt of the charge. He will suffer no unbearable punishment, nothing worse than exile, totally unharmed. Now I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Now my curse on the murderer. Whoever he is, a lone man unknown in his crime or one among many, let that man drag out his life in agony. This is after no one has volunteered himself, Let him drag it out. Let that man drag out his life in agony, step by painful step. I curse myself as well. If by any chance he proves to be an intimate of our house, here at my hearth, with my full knowledge, may the curse I just called down on him strike me. And this is another point where the audience is like, say no more, say no more.
Yep. Dramatic irony.
Exactly.
Is when you know something the person of the story does not know.
All the dramatic irony. So someone has a bright idea. We can't figure out who the murderer. No one is stepping forward. So Creon, who is Oedipus's brother-in-law, so the brother of Jocasta, who's the queen of Thebes, he comes up with an idea. So what's his idea that he comes up with? He comes up.
Yeah. So Creon says, I was just trying to pull up this passage here to read it, but Creon says, let's call for Tiresias. Tiresias is a poet. Tiresias, like all poets, is blind. And Tiresias knows what happened to King Laius.
Yeah, he knows things.
Tiresias...
that character, who is that character that says, I drink and I know things?
Drink and I know things.
And maybe that's from that horrible show that we will never, ever...
It's a Game of Thrones thing, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've never read that, never seen it.
Yeah. I started reading the first book, and it was a little too Oedipal for my taste. Let's just put it that way. So, Creon calls for Tiresias. He comes in, but he doesn't want to reveal what he knows. So, the irony, the blind man sees, and the seeing man is blind to the realities. And Oedipus finally drags it out of him, and he says, "Oh, I'll let loose. I have such fury in me. Now I see it all. You helped hatch the plot. You did the work, yes, short of killing him with your own hands. And given eyes, I'd say you did the killing single-handed." And so what
is that so? I charge you then, submit to that decree you just laid down. From this day onward, speak to no one, not these citizens, not myself. You are the curse, the corruption of the land.
So Oedipus begins to suspect that there is a plot underway to overthrow him and for his brother-in-law Creon to take the throne.
Yeah.
And that is part of some of the subtext that is going on here. And so he thinks Tiresias is in on it. And that's why he's withholding this. He's like, you guys, you're the ones who killed Laius. And if you had eyes, I bet you would have done it yourself. And that's when Tiresias loses it.
Finally lays it on him. Yeah, so I think you should imagine, when you think of Tiresias, angry old man shouting at cloud kind of thing. But he's a prophet, right? He knows things. He sees things. And it seems like there's, on some level, every prophet is a kind of a Cassandra, right? They say the truth.
Right, yeah.
But no one really wants to believe them or does believe them. I mean, Cassandra's case, it's like, it's spoken about her that no one will believe her. Right, that she'll prophesy and no one will believe her. I think that's part of what's going on here, is that Tiresias has insight from the gods, and
what the leader of the chorus says to him is that Tiresias sees with the eyes of Apollo.
Yeah, yes. There's all kinds of, as you said at the beginning, the blind one who sees and the seeing one who's blind.
No.
That's a huge part of the irony of this moment between Oedipus and Tiresias. And of course, eventually what happens is they drag him off. And
before the exchange we've just read, Tiresias says, "How terrible to see the truth, when the truth is only pain to him who sees." Right? And it's just this,
which raises this big question. I mean, this is a big human question. Is it better to tell someone the truth,
right,
if it's going to destroy them?
And would it ever actually be good to know your own future? This is a way that you could, it's a fun question to ask young people, is like, if you knew everything that was going to happen, like if you could right now have the entirety of your life laid out in front of you and to know everything that's going to happen to you the rest of your life, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? Right? So much of our lives, I mean, good grief, I'm a data analyst, which is basically as close to like a modern, as close to like an augur, as you can get in the modern world. Like my job is to try to look at the past to predict the future, right? And so much of life in the modern world is kind of based around the idea that we can see the future and therefore control it. But the irony is that when you give yourself over to the oracle, that that is the point in which your fate actually becomes set in stone. There's something about this, which is why the God's people were told you're never supposed to go after oracles. All those prohibitions against practicing magic in the Old Testament are really about divination. It's not about like casting fireball in Dungeons and Dragons or something like this. It's about divination. It is about going to the stars or consulting the entrails of an animal or something like this to try to know the future, right? To try to gain some control over it. Because the idea is that when you do this, you actually sort of put yourself under the power of those forces.
Yeah.
And so this is what Tiresias is sort of warning him about. It's sort of like, don't ask questions you don't want to know the answer to.
Yeah. 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 I mean, there's so many, so many big, difficult questions in some of these moments, right? Well, I mean, we're going to talk about the whole fate thing at the end, I guess. But here's a moment that it really comes in, and of course, like on some level, the fact that Oedipus does not immediately or doesn't quite know whether to believe Tiresias is almost, can we say it's a mercy from the gods? Maybe that the gods, are they giving him another chance?
No.
No. Is the voice of Jocasta, who we're about to hear, who's saying, don't listen to that guy.
Yeah.
Do you really? Is she? I don't know. Jocasta, in some ways,
a mercy. If it's a mercy, it's not from the gods, not in this story. But I mean, it's
Okay.
sort of like you could say that there is a kind of a grounded human experience of Jocasta and the others saying, don't look into this any further. But it's not like Oedipus has a choice, right? His city around him is dying. People are looking to him. He's the guy. He's Oedipus.
Yeah.
He's the guy that solves the problems. And how does he solve the problems? He solves the problems by solving riddles.
Yeah.
And this is where
a riddle.
The riddle of the Sphinx in the background, which is not actually in the play. Are we going to talk about the riddle of the Sphinx?
Yes, man, you're kind of stealing a little bit of my thunder here.
I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to steal your thunder. I actually have something on that. But okay, all right. So let's just continue. Let's read this bit with Jocasta now.
Okay. So yeah, I'll read Jocasta, and you can play Oedipus for a second. So
all right.
It's just the two of us. All right.
I threatened in the pre-show to read Oedipus in the voice of Sir Peter Ustinov, but only when he's Sir Hiss, the snake in Disney's Robin Hood.
That's right. We talked a lot about Disney's Robin Hood.
Wait, was he Hiss? Was he? He wasn't Hiss. He was. No.
He was Prince John.
Prince John. He was Prince.
He was Prince John. That's right.
Which makes way more sense. That makes more sense. Yeah.
All right. So Jocasta, Oedipus is concerned that Tiresias has said something true, as he tends to always do. So Jocasta says, "A prophet? Well, then free yourself of every charge. Listen to me. Learn some peace of mind. No skill in the world, nothing human can penetrate the future. Here is proof, quick and to the point. An oracle came to Laius one fine day. I won't say from Apollo himself, but his underlings, his priests, and it declared that doom would strike him down at the hands of a son, our son, to be born of our own flesh and blood. But Laius, so the report goes at least, was killed by strangers, thieves, at a place where three roads meet. My son, He wasn't 3 days old, and the boy's father fastened his ankles, had a henchman fling him away on a barren, trackless mountain. There, you see, Apollo brought neither thing to pass. My baby no more murdered his father than Laius suffered his wildest fear, death at his own son's hands. That's how the seers and all their revelations mapped out the future. Brush them from your mind. Whatever the god needs and seeks, he'll bring to light himself with ease.
Strange. Hearing you just now, my mind wandered, my thoughts racing back and forth.
What do you mean? Why so anxious, startled?
I thought I heard you say that Laius was cut down at a place where 3 roads meet.
That was the story. It hasn't died out yet.
Where did this thing happen? Be precise.
A place called Phocis, where 2 branching roads, one from Daulia, one from Delphi, come together, a crossroads.
When? How long ago?
The heralds no sooner reported Laius dead than you appeared, and they hailed you King of Thebes.
My God, my God. What have you planned to do to me?
Yeah, so this is the moment when Oedipus is kind of putting 2 and 2 together.
The place where 3 roads meet.
Yeah, we mentioned this last time as a very important detail, because this is the thing that makes Oedipus go, hold on. He's not saying it out loud at this point, but you can tell he's thinking, wait, I killed a guy at a 3-road crossroads.
Yeah. And the idea, I don't know if this actually works on a map or not, but the idea, at least in the play, seems to be, why is it significant that it's the meeting of 3 roads? Because there's the road to Thebes, there's a road to the place where Oedipus grew up, and there's the road to the oracle.
Yeah, and he grows up in Corinth.
Yeah, in Corinth.
I mean, this is if you want the basic outline of the story, listen to our last episode, because we gave that at the beginning. But yeah, he grew up in Corinth, the supposed son of Polybus and Merope there, who are the king and queen of Corinth. But he turns out he's actually their adopted son.
This is all going to be revealed here in just a moment in the play. But there's a kind of that place where the 3 roads meet. That's the triangulation of the sort of the 2 homes, the 2 places that Oedipus is known as a young person, you know, where he was born and then where he was raised. And then the oracle at Delphi. And it's the oracle at Delphi, it's Apollo,
you
know, clear-eyed, who causes all of the problems in the story in a certain way, because
from a certain point of view,
the problem with, as I was kind of mentioning a moment ago, the problem with divination, the problem with prophecies, is that they're almost always true, but they never say what they mean.
Yeah,
and so you know, Jocasta's whole argument here is, don't listen to this guy. Don't listen to this guy,
right.
Because, you know, let me give you an example of another prophecy that was made that was obviously untrue. You know, back in the day, me and Laius, we had this baby and we got rid of it. And by the way, she doesn't seem sad about this at all, because infant exposure is a thing in the ancient world. Unfortunately, we have not done a lot better in this regard in our civilization. But, you know, we had this baby and we got rid of it. And then some random stranger, probably a thief or a highwayman, a robber, that's who killed Laius. So there, look, see, you can't listen to anything this guy says.
Yeah, and her argument is not prophecy is not a thing.
Right. It's that he's a false prophet.
Yeah, or priests and underlings and oracles.
Right. Yeah.
Look, if Apollo wants to tell you something, he's just going to come right out and say it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's essentially a kind of. I'm trying to think of the best way. It's an anti-religious sentiment, and by that I don't mean anti-religion. I mean against sort of the priests.
It's an
anti-clerical
sentiment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Thus it ever was, Father Andrew. Thus it ever
it's
was.
True. It's true.
So Oedipus, as all of this, he's starting to put the pieces together. He says, "Now, Jocasta, I will tell you all. Making my way towards this triple crossroad, I began to see a herald, then a brace of colts, drawing a wagon. and mounted on the bench, a man, just as you've described him, coming face to face. And the one in the lead and the old man himself were about to thrust me off the road. Brute force! And the one shouldering me aside the driver, I strike him in anger, and the old man watching me coming up along his wheels, he brings down his prod, 2 prongs straight at my head. I paid him back with interest. Short work, by God. With one blow of the staff in this right hand, I knock him out of his high seat, roll him out of the wagon, sprawling headlong. I killed them all. Every mother's son.
Ooh. So it's, I mean, this is
like, here's the time I did some murder.
Classical road rage.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what this is. We met together, and Laius kind of is ready to, Laius clearly is the one who instigates this.
Yeah.
But I mean, Oedipus is not the kind of guy who's just going to back off so that there's not an accident, so that, there's not some killing involved. And notice that line, I killed them all, every mother's son. I didn't check the ancient Greek, but I mean, again, that's another sort of mother's son, because I mean, he's talking to his mother here.
Yeah.
And also his wife.
I'm sure that Fagles is too good a translator to have totally neglected the irony in that.
Made something up. Yeah. There's no way. So at this point now, what's been revealed to Oedipus through these conversations is that he's the one who killed Laius. Now, he doesn't yet know that that was his dad. He doesn't yet know that Jocasta's his mom. But the mystery has been solved. Yeah. Who killed Laius? Oedipus killed Laius.
Yeah.
Right? So this is part of the prophecy. There were two different oracular utterances related to this. One that tells Laius that he's going to be killed by his own son, and then one that tells Oedipus much earlier than this play begins. Both these events are much earlier than this play begins. That he's going to kill his father and marry his mother, right? So I mean, at this point, he should have been thinking. Well, he doesn't know that this is his father. Actually, now that I think about
it,
right? But yeah. So all of these things kind of are in play. Okay, not to get Freudian about this, but killing your father. Why is this an important thing?
So the thing to understand is that tyrannicide is always, or regicide is always patricide.
Yeah, the king is always your father on some level. That
killing the king and killing your father are the same thing. It's an active revolution, right? There's a I read this and I don't know if it is true. So somebody get out there and fact check this for me. We used to use, Snopes. I don't know. Can you even fact check things anymore with AI?
We have to fact check Snopes now.
Yeah, exactly. So I've read somewhere that George Lucas's original plan for Star Wars was that it would end with Luke falling to the dark side, and that it would end with him taking the helmet off of Vader and putting it on. Of course, obviously Vader is father. That's what
Vada.
It's not well disguised or clever, right? But
what?
But that the story would end, the trilogy would end with Luke putting the helmet on and saying, "Now I am Vader.
No, I am the master."
Yeah. In other words, to say, but basically say, "Now I'm father," right? And this is the word, of course, of this is what Lewis called the myth of evolutionism, the Wagnerian myth. He's got a great essay about this, which I wish I'd thought to pull an excerpt from, but maybe I'll read it next time. But in this essay, Lewis talks about the basic myth of evolutionism, and he says, I'm not talking about the theory of biological development from species or whatever. I'm talking about evolutionism as a myth of progress, which is the act of revolution, the act of eventually you have to kill your father, or the father has to die and pass away so that the son can come to power and so that he can take over, kind of what comes next. And so there's a way to inherit what your father gives you, which is what it means to be a son, right? And then there's the active revolution, which would be to rise up, to take it prematurely, or to kill your father in order to take the kingdom.
Yeah.
And this is when you do an action like this, it is the French Revolution is a regicide, but it's also a patricide, because you're taking it's a way of saying we have this tradition that we've inherited as a country, and we're going to burn all of that to ashes. We're going to literally cut the head off of the country. We're going to literally cut the head off of our civilization, and we're going to put something new in its place.
Yeah.
And it's an incredibly dangerous action to take, because it sets a precedent for the next revolution and the next revolution and the next revolution. And so what very often happens, unless you can find some way of kind of legitimizing yourself as the new ruler, usually through some kind of divine right, what will happen is now the pattern for regime change has been happening, and revolutions tend to spiral. And this is something, by the way, the Holy King and Prophet David understood well. And so he doesn't, which is one of the reasons he does not lift his hand against Saul, that is, against the Lord's anointed, but rather he waits for God's timing to bring an end to the house of Saul before he takes the throne. And he does actually have to fight to take it and keep it and all that stuff. But the fact that Saul does not die by his hand is part of why, David, even though he's a man of war, he's a man of bloodshed, he doesn't have blood on his hands in the sense of when he takes the throne. And that is part of why his dynasty is able to be established ultimately, eternally.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's my mind is going in a million directions based on what you just said, because it's so profoundly true.
Yeah.
One of the things that occurs to me also is that this sin of patricide, of regicide, I think in many ways is baked into American culture.
Of course.
And because, frankly, our country was built on rebellion. And I'm not, we don't need to go over, whether the American Revolution was a good idea or not, or anything like that. But it just is. This is the case, right? It's built on revolution, where it's overthrowing an old order. And I think that these are some of the temptations that Americans have in particular, I think, which is we have this sense that whoever's in charge, it's wrong for them to be in charge on some level, question authority.
Yeah.
Which is funny. Like, if I obey that, am I just obeying another authority who told me to question authority? I mean,
and then you put your guy in power, and then now you can't trust your guy.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of and of course, an American, when you hear that, there's a reflexive feeling of like, well, you can't just obey blindly, as though obedience is always blind, apparently.
Right.
Right. It's funny, even within conversations within the church, you get this.
Yeah.
When I say by default we should obey our bishops, by default we should obey our bishops. That should be our default position. If I ever say something like that, almost always, particularly on the internet, someone's gonna be like, "We're not called to blindly obey." I'm like, are we ever called to obey? Ever? Do we ever obey, or do we just only do what we agree with?
Right.
That's not obedience, right? So I think that's part of what's going on here, is the sense of patricide.
Yeah.
And for thousands of years, this has been something that humanity has said is bad.
Yeah.
Even before Christ is revealed. But there is something also, again, we're talking about this kind of displacement so that the human being could experience this and maybe integrate it, right? So one of the things that I think is important, I can't speak for mothers and daughters, but for fathers and sons, okay? I am both of those things. I'm both a father and a son. There is a dynamic between fathers and sons, which is an important dynamic that is actually good and healthy and normal. And that is the dynamic of, at some point, in some way, the son is going to exceed his father.
Yeah.
He's gonna, and maybe at some point become stronger than. That's what always.
Can I say, like, the best example of this in classical Greek literature is Hector and his son. He's standing on the walls of Troy, and he's holding up his little baby, and his little baby is like seeing the horsehair plume on Hector's head kind of shake, and it scares him a little bit, and the baby starts crying, and Hector makes a prayer to the gods. A prayer, as it turns out, the gods will not answer, or not in the way Hector would like, anyway. But his prayer is, someday, let men say of this boy that he was a better man than his father.
Yeah, there you go, trying to rehabilitate the Trojans.
They don't need rehabilitating because Hector's the best. Hector's the best.
I'm just messing with you.
All this.
Yes, of all those awful people in that epic, Hector is the best, probably.
Hector's great, man. Hector, I don't know. I mean, Hector's one of the 9 worthies. Achilles doesn't make the list.
I'm just messing with
Hector
you
makes the list
because it's fun. But yeah, there's going to be always some way in which the son exceeds his father, and whether it's a lifelong thing, like may my sons be better than I am, or just the fact that men age, humans age, and so at some point the son will become stronger than his father. Or it may be that the son is better at something than his father. He just excels past him in some particular trait, or skill, or something like this. Like this is a normal narrative. This is a normal dynamic, and if it's done well, right? If there's a good father and a good son, then it's done in a way that becomes about passing the baton. It's done in a way that actually becomes about increasing the honor of the family, about increasing the virtue of the family, that to use kind of medieval language, that this house is now honored by what this next generation has done.
So, and this is where, not to invoke Jordan Peterson too much here, but the way that you do this, right, is you go down into Hades and you save your father. That is, you take the things about the tradition that have been given to you and you bring them into life, right? And of course, what Christ does is to go down into Hades and to take Adam by the hand and to bring him up into paradise.
Yeah.
It's not an overthrow of the father, but it's actually the rescuing of the father, because this is also the thing about tradition, is that it's always in danger of becoming decay. It's always in danger of death.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is a way through, and the way is fundamentally through self-sacrifice. And so this is the thing. If you're going to affect a regime change, if you're going to take the position of a king, you can basically do 2 things if you want to make it last. One is you have some kind of divine right to be there, and the other is you kill a monster. Right, and that's how Oedipus has gotten his throne. And by the way, technically speaking, Oedipus also the legal heir of the kingdom.
Yes,
he literally actually is the son of the previous king.
Right, it's true.
And so. But there's a fundamental, and I think there's a letter that we're going to read about this next episode from one of our listeners. So I don't want to steal too much of our thunder from next episode, but there's a fundamental sort of failure to do the thing that Christ does, right? Which would actually be to save his father, to rescue his father. There's definitely a sense here that Laius is old. He's kind of, ineffectual as a king. He's trying to forestall fate. He's not been able to sire a son, and when he finally does, that son is, so there's some sort of issues there, right? And there's a way to succeed your father by actually redeeming him, by redeeming the tradition, by redeeming the good things about your society, the good things about your country, the good things about your nationality, bringing those up out of Hades. But the sort of the default thing that we do, especially from the Enlightenment onward, is to instead say everything that's come before us is wood, hay, and stubble. Let's burn it to the ground, and let's build something in our own image.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the right way to do this is to build, that you are building something on top of the foundation laid by your father. And so, yeah, you exceed, but because of what he has done. And it's got to, the healthy way is that it's not done in opposition between generations. I mean, this is a house divided itself cannot stand, right? And so part of what's going on in this play is that it's being demonstrated on stage why enmity between father and son is a bad idea. But it's in an incredibly powerful and genius way. It's distilled absolutely perfectly such that there is this enmity and they do not even realize at that moment that they are father and son.
Yeah.
And so what it does is it actually reveals both men for who they are, which is not great. Not great. Laius is not great. Oedipus is not great.
Yeah.
You know? And, you know,
I mean,
the scripture ultimately says, honor your father.
I mean, I will say Oedipus, by the standards of like his time, up till now has been a good king.
Oh,
at
sure,
least as far as he knows. But there's the problem is that there's kind of hidden rot, right? Which is hidden from everyone, including from himself.
Yeah.
You know,
okay.
and,
all right.
Yeah.
Let's move on and introduce the next big sin.
Good times.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and read this. This is from Jocasta. She's Jocasta, the prophecy skeptic, right? The prophet skeptic. She says, "Lords of the realm, it occurred to me just now to visit the temples of the gods. So I have my branch in hand and incense too. Oedipus is beside himself, racked with anguish, no longer a man of sense. He won't admit the latest prophecies are hollow as the old. He's at the mercy of every passing voice if the voice tells of terror. I urge him gently, nothing seems to help. So I turn to you, Apollo. You are nearest." I have to say, as I was reading this, a thought occurred to me, which is, again, very timely. Very timely. Listen to what she says. He's at the mercy of every passing voice if the voice tells of terror. And doesn't this describe our age, where a lot of the most listened to voices are the ones that are making you angry and scared? And they say, oh, I know the truth. They present themselves almost as prophets.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's about geopolitics, whether it's about things going on in the church, whatever it is, it's interesting. I think that, you know, this sort of, I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. So it's an interesting set of lines there from Jocasta. Yeah. So what happens next is a messenger comes and tells that Polybus of Corinth, whom Oedipus thinks is his father, has died. This messenger comes and says that he's died. And so why don't you read this next line? Jocasta then goes and speaks to one of the servants.
"Quickly, go to your master. Tell him this. You prophecies of the gods, where are you now? This is the man that Oedipus feared for years. He fled him, not to kill him, and now he's dead, quite by chance, a normal, natural death. Not murdered by his son."
Yeah, because remember, Oedipus has heard this prophecy that he's going to kill his father and marry his mother, and he thinks that means Polybus and Merope.
Right.
So
by the way, in my imagination, Jocasta is played by Katharine Hepburn. I can't do a good like transatlantic accent. "Quickly, go to your master. Tell him this. You prophecies of the gods. Where are you now?" I can't pull it off. But like in my head, that's who I'm. Because I feel like she could do I feel like she could do kind of the snippy, you know. Especially, I'm thinking about her performance in A Lion in Winter and, you know, movies like that. You know, like she could do the sort of snippy, you know, prophecy skeptic, you know, difficult queen, but also like, you know, then the tragedy comes out, like when she knows. Like I can definitely see her doing a good offstage, hanging herself.
Hear me out.
Yep.
Maureen O'Hara.
Oh yeah.
In The Quiet Man.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
And can you, as I say, can you imagine John Wayne as Oedipus? No, maybe not.
No, I cannot.
No, I cannot.
And yet, if he could be the centurion, you know, if he could be St. Longinus, why not Oedipus?
Yeah. So, okay. So for the moment then, Polybus is dead. Huzzah! There's much rejoicing. You know, everyone's like, oh, this
It's like
is
prophecy averted.
Exactly.
Prophecy averted.
And so then Oedipus, so a little exchange here between Oedipus and Jocasta. He says, so, Jocasta, why look to the prophet's hearth, the fires of the future? Why scan the birds that scream above our heads? They winged me on to the murder of my father, did they? That was my doom? Well, look, he's dead and buried, hidden under the earth, and here I am in Thebes. I never put hand to sword. Less some longing for me wasted him away, then in a sense you'd say I caused his death. But now all those prophecies I feared, Polybus packs them off to sleep with him in hell. They're nothing, worthless. And then she says, there, didn't I tell you from the start? And he's like, oh, wait, there was another
second part of the prophecy.
So
and
what
I
does
feel
he
like
say?
feel like this one is delivered a little more awkwardly to his wife.
Okay. You can't do John Wayne here. Well,
Apollo told me once, it is my fate. I must make love with my own mother, shed my father's blood with my own hands. So for years I've given Corinth a wide berth, and it's been my good fortune too. But still, to see one's parents and look into their eyes is the greatest joy that I know. I'm sorry.
we remember we told you guys last time that this is just like
freaking
dripping with irony.
face. It's so bad. Oh, this guy.
People like, you can imagine the crowd going like, it's your mom.
Yeah. I imagine like one really drunk guy in the front is like, oh man.
Having worked in theater, I hated that guy.
Yeah. But we all know, yeah, he's there for sure. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So the same messenger who tells him about Polybus reveals that he's not the son of the royals of Corinth.
Yeah. Oh,
but rather
don't worry.
that he was delivered to them by a servant, a shepherd of Laius.
Yeah. So that kind of breaks up the huzzah moment.
It's like, woo. So
yeah,
Jocasta
realizes
the truth first.
Yeah, she figures it out. So Oedipus is talking to her, and why don't we go ahead and go back and forth on this?
Yeah.
I'll be Oedipus this time.
Okay.
I won't do John Wayne. I want to do John Wayne now. Oh, Jocasta, you remember the man? Sorry, I can't do that very well. Jocasta, you remember the man we just sent for?
But he could have. When he met Laius on the road, he could have been like, "Fill your hands." I mean, there's a real opportunity there. Anyway, okay, sorry.
Okay, is that the one he means?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That man. Well, why ask? Sorry, I can't do a Katharine Hepburn. I'm really trying, but I just don't.
Do Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Yeah. No. So, that man, why ask? Old shepherd, talk, empty nonsense. Don't give it another thought. Don't even think.
What? Give up now with a clue like this? Fail to solve the mystery of my birth? Not for all the world.
Stop. In the name of God, if you love your own life, call off this search. My suffering is enough.
Courage. Even if my mother turns out to be a slave and I a slave 3 generations back, you would not seem common. I know. Sorry. It's just hard to deliver these lines knowing what we know, right?
So bad.
Yeah.
Oh no, listen to me. I beg you, don't do this.
Listen to you? No more. I must know it all, must see the truth at last.
Please, for your sake, I want the best for you.
Your best is more than I can bear.
You're doomed. May you never fathom who you are.
Hurry, fetch me the herdsman now. He's talking to a servant. Leave her to glory in her royal birth.
Man of agony. That is the only name I have for you. That, no other, ever, ever, ever.
And so then the next thing that happens is Oedipus has this servant that
who's a shepherd
delivered. Yeah, a shepherd found and then questioned. So here's the shepherd, and he's asking like, where exactly did this child you said that you delivered to the people ultimately in Corinth? Where did that child come from? So then the shepherd says this, and I'll read the part of the shepherd, and you can do Oedipus. Then the child came from the house of Laius.
A slave or born of his own blood?
Oh no, I'm right at the edge. The horrible truth. I've got to say it.
And I'm at the edge of hearing horrors, yes, but I must hear it.
All right. His son, they said it was. His son. But the one inside, your wife, she'll tell it best.
My wife. She gave it to you.
Yes, my king.
Why? What for?
We're skipping ahead a little bit here. She was afraid. Frightening prophecies.
What?
They said he'd kill his parents.
But you gave him to this old man. Why?
I pitied the little baby master, hoped he'd take him off to his own country, far away, but he saved him for this fate. If you are the man he says you are, believe me, you were born for pain.
Oh, God. All come true. All burst to light. O light, now let me look my last on you. I stand revealed at last, cursed in my birth, cursed in my marriage, cursed in the lives I cut down with these hands.
Yeah, and this is a point now where Oedipus realizes everything. So Jocasta, meanwhile, has gone off and killed herself. And then Oedipus, oh man, it's hard to say this. Oedipus finds, isn't it like the cloak pins or something like this?
Mm-hmm. Her cloak pin.
Her cloak pin, and he gouges out his own eyes. And so the one who was seeing but blind now becomes truly blind now that he finally sees. I mean, this is part of the what's going on in this. And I mean, and there's just this kind of a denouement now where he has to be, Creon is back in charge, and he has to be led ultimately out of the city. And this eventually then segues into the next play.
By the way, this is my +3 water jug of...
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, that's basically... So here we are, essentially. This is the fullness of the action of the play.
Yeah.
It feels very sudden, actually,
But all I can hear, for some reason, is, "O brother, where art thou? I'm a man of constant sorrow. I've seen trouble all my days."
Oh, yeah. Although that movie, of course, is
obviously a retelling of the Odyssey.
Is the Odyssey, yeah.
Yeah. But also, that song is applicable. I was just thinking about when he's saying, the shepherd speaks to him, and we should definitely, as Orthodox Christians, we should have this kind of language in mind when we read the hymns of the Passion, when we sing the hymns in church of the Passion. We'll talk about this maybe a little more next time. But let's see here. Where's the line that I'm thinking of?
I can see in the chat that some people are okay with my idea of John Wayne. It's playing Oedipus.
Yeah. Man of Agony, that's the only name I have for you. Right. I mean, there's definitely... We talked about this around the Iliad, but the continuity of the civilization that produced the Iliad, the Odyssey, the plays of Sophocles, the plays of Euripides, that civilization becomes Greek orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And
like there's a bunch of I mean, go look this up, people. There are a lot of, and just if we just want to narrowly focus on Sophocles, there's references to him in the Church Fathers. There's Byzantine commentaries on some of his works. This
also,
is definitely
when you
one
have,
of the people that the Fathers are reading.
And just step on my to get up on a soapbox for just a quick sec. Sorry, I know we're going long, but just indulge me for like 2 minutes. Okay, there's this idea that you sometimes run into when people are looking into the Orthodox Church And then they're like, oh no, it's too Eastern, it's too Oriental, it's too foreign, it's too Byzantine, et cetera, et cetera. But these are the same people who will sometimes really claim, like the Western canon, it starts with the Homeric poems and, Sophocles and Euripides and they're big sort of like Western culture, Western civilization, but Orthodoxy, that's just too weird and Eastern. But Saint Romanos the Melodist is closer to Homer and is in fact the true inheritor of Homer's poetic tradition than Dante is. And I love Dante. Dante, by the way, also closer to Saint Romanos than he is to anything that resembles anything called Western culture today, but it's a different conversation. Saint Romanos the Melodist, the other great authors of the poetry, the hymnography, specifically the hymns of Holy Week, which is our epic. I'll say more about this at the very end, but those things are in continuity. And so there's this language in here that ancient Christians were looking at. Here's Oedipus. He's a man of sorrow. He's a man of agony, a man of constant agony. And they look at that and they look at the suffering servant in Isaiah. And they find a poetic idiom to express the suffering of the Messiah in the Greek tongue. So yeah. Anyway, this is actually a good argument for why we should read these things, is because eventually it finds its fulfillment and it finds its redemption in the hymns of Holy Week in particular.
Yeah.
So
yeah. All right. Well, we're racing towards the end here, but I wanted to focus. I wanted to focus on the riddle of the Sphinx, and here's the reason. It's not in the play. It's not. It's funny. You look up, what's the source? If you Google this, whatever, what's the source of the riddle of the Sphinx? A lot of the
little AI thing at the top will say it's from this play, which is why Sophocles. That's why I'm not afraid of ever being replaced by AI.
Yeah, that's right. It'll say it's from Sophocles, Oedipus the King. It's not in there. It's not in there. We skipped most of the lines, but this is not where the lines we skipped because it's not in there at all. Yeah. Now, the riddle is the fact that he defeated the Sphinx's riddle, defeated the Sphinx by guessing her riddle, that is mentioned. But the actual content of the riddle is not mentioned. So I want to just spend a minute here on this because I have an intuition, but I haven't completely worked it out yet. So maybe you can help me on this. And you guys in the chat, when we look at the chat in a second, maybe you have some ideas too. So, okay, number one, Sphinx. Well, what is a Sphinx? A Sphinx is essentially a throne guardian, right? In ancient Near Eastern religion, of course, this very much affects ancient Greek religion as well. And it's essentially a cherub kind of figure, right. Okay? Sort of a lion kind of shape with a face and sometimes wings. In the case of this Sphinx, it's often depicted very feminine, with the chest of a woman, the face of a woman, wings. Sometimes it's depicted as very large compared to Oedipus, other times small and kind of climbing up on him. But in any event, so etymologically, the word Sphinx in Greek, it actually means a strangler. So this is the origin also related to words like asphyxiation, and even the word sphincter, it's a thing that squeezes, right? Although there is an alternate etymology, and I'm just going to say I think that both of these things are true at the same time, an alternate etymology from ancient Egyptian, that it means divine image, a divine image. So that's also kind of there as well. So sphinxes are a kind of liminal figure of an old or territorial religion. So the Sphinx is guarding the road, and the road cannot be used, and anyone who approaches the Sphinx and gets the riddle wrong will be killed by the Sphinx.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't use the road as long as the Sphinx is there. And so there's some interpretations of this suggesting that the Sphinx, who has this sort of territory, functions like the more ancient kind of paganism, where you get these territorial gods and spirits that kind of govern and control particular places. Maybe. And then ultimately what has to do is that the Sphinx has to give way kind of in favor of the Olympian gods' religion.
Yeah,
Maybe.
It might be something to that. I don't know. I'm always, theories like that, I'm always a little, like that can't be everything.
Yeah,
Like if it were that, I feel like the memory would not have held on the way that it does. So, talk about a couple of things here. One, why is the riddle not mentioned in the
Why? Why
play?
is the riddle not in the play? It's mentioned, but not given.
I think there's maybe two reasons. The first is that it seems to have been very well known.
Okay.
The first is that it seems to have been very well known in the ancient world. The second reason, I think, is that the play itself is a riddle, right? And it's a riddle which Oedipus himself is trying to solve. And of course, the riddle of the Sphinx, very famously, is actually, do you want to read it here real quick from Apollodorus? I'm glad you put this in the script, by the way, because I actually had my copy of Apollodorus over here. I was going to read it, but you already have the script. So why don't you go ahead and
Of course you were. So so this is one. There are multiple ancient sources that it's found in, but this is probably the most complete one. Okay, so this is from Apollodorus's Bibliotheca, or the library. Laius was buried by Damasistratus, king of Plataea, and Creon, son of Menoetius, succeeded to the kingdom. In his reign, a heavy calamity befell Thebes, for Hera sent the Sphinx, whose mother was Echidna and her father Typhon, two monsters. And she had the face of a woman, the breast and feet and tail of a lion, and the wings of a bird. And having learned a riddle from the Muses, she sat on Mount Ficium and propounded it to the Thebans. And the riddle was this: what is that which has one voice and yet becomes 4-footed and 2-footed and 3-footed? Now the Thebans were in possession of an oracle which declared that they should be rid of the Sphinx whenever they had read her riddle, so they often met and discussed the answer. When they could not find it, the Sphinx used to snatch away one of them and gobble him up. When many had perished, and last of all Creon's son Haemon, Creon made proclamation that to him who should read the riddle he would give both the kingdom and the wife of Laius. On hearing that, Oedipus found the solution, declaring that the riddle of the Sphinx referred to man. For as a babe he is 4-footed, going on 4 limbs. As an adult he is 2-footed, and as an old man he gets besides a third support in a staff. So the Sphinx threw herself from the citadel, and Oedipus both succeeded to the kingdom and unwittingly married his mother, and begat sons by her, Polynices and Eteocles, and daughters Ismene and Antigone. But some say the children were born to him by Evrigania, daughter of Hyperphus. So that's the basic sense, is this, what goes on. And I've heard variations on this. What goes on 4 feet in the morning, right, 2 feet in the day, and 3 in the evening is another way this is sometimes put.
I mean, so you can kind of think about Oedipus, who starts out his life with his feet hobbled, not just feet tied together, but probably something like
pierced,
actually pierced through with a leather thong. Yeah. And so kind of the funny,
does he fit this? Does he fit this in some way?
So the kind of the funny thing is that he sort of starts out his life 3-footed.
Yeah, and less than,
yes,
like he can't even crawl.
So okay, but so this is wild speculation on my part.
Okay, yeah,
but
speculate.
I thought about this for years. So he starts out his life 3-footed. That is, his feet are tied together. He's crawling on his two hands, and then his feet tied together. He starts out on 3 legs, then 2 as a man. Then when he's blinded at the very end of the play, he has to be led out. It's 4 feet.
Oh, because other people.
He goes through the riddle in reverse.
See, this is what I've been trying to figure out is the riddle the story of Oedipus in some way?
I think that the riddle is something to do with and I don't want to, I mean, again, this is wild speculation. It'd be very hard to support this if I were trying to publish an academic paper or something. So
okay, you don't have to.
I don't have to. I already have a degree. I can say things now. in the part of this is influenced because I've been reading the great Olivier Clement, who's a French convert to Orthodoxy during the last century. His amazing book, Transfiguring Time. And he talks a lot about in the early chapters of the book about the Dionysian mysteries and the way that the Greeks tried to sort of use them to get this temporary escape from the inevitability of the human condition and the perpetual cycle they believed of death and reincarnation, which is not the same thing at all as resurrection. And that, a temporary escape from that, a temporary numbing to that, is one of the things that the Dionysia, which is the context for the original performance of this play, is supposed to help you kind of escape. So here you have Oedipus, and the point is that Oedipus, like Achilles, is humanity, right? And that he's trying to work against fate. He's trying to solve the riddle of who he is, of what his origin is, of what his end is, of what the human condition is going to be. But he somehow, but in this process, in the same way that the story itself is nonlinear, it sort of like works backwards, right? We start the story at the end. Also, Oedipus's life is kind of backwards. And I mean, visually, you could say Oedipus is sort of backing into the truth. He's backing into life. Yeah. And so, and some of these thoughts are not super well formed, but this is something that has bothered me for years about the play, and the relation, because obviously there's a relation to the riddle. The riddle is said to be said. By the way, I'm gonna have to turn on a light here. Hold on.
The darkness of Texas, apparently.
I got the westering sun in my face through the windows, but
God bless you.
Here. Yeah, it's okay. We're gonna get new curtains. The studio continues to be a work in progress, but we're getting it. It's getting better. Now I've lost my thought. Hold on. So Oedipus is sort of backing his way into the truth, and the riddle is there in the background. But the Sphinx is called repeatedly throughout the drama. She is called the riddling, singing Sphinx.
Yeah.
And I should just mention, this entire play is being sung, like kind of probably in sort of like a sing-song way, kind of like chanting. She's the riddling, singing Sphinx, right? Our lives, I'm sure there's I'm not sure, I know, which I guess is the same thing as being sure. There's a Shakespeare line for this. That all the world's a stage.
Yes.
All the men and women.
And I mean, is there some level in which the Sphinx is kind of the playwright?
Right. I think there's something like that, but also, I mean, so in ancient symbolism, and this is there in the Holy Scriptures as well, the Sphinx or the cherubim is closely associated with riddles and the guarding of a mystery, but also the unveiling of a mystery. So even, actually, Mathieu Pajot's The Language of Creation, his book has a great chapter in this about this. Recently, in the Symbolism Masterclass that Jonathan Pajot did, he gave an incredible explanation of kind of how this works and how the cherubim or the Sphinx or the four beasts or the beast with four heads, all these different, how this is, what this has to do with revelation and riddles and self-sacrifice. And it would take me a long time to probably unpack that right now. But the point is that this is a creature that in every ancient mythology, in Babylonian mythology, in Egyptian mythology, in the Holy Scriptures, in Greek mythology, there's a figure like this that is associated with the revelation of mysteries, but also the revelation of oracles. And of course, the oracle that comes to the prophet Ezekiel when he sees God, on the throne, pulled by the cherubim, or guarded by the chariot throne. The mystery that's being revealed to him is actually the mystery of human suffering, and specifically, why are the people of God suffering? Yeah. Right. And so that's also, some of that is actually in this riddle. The riddle is about aging, and it's about death, and it's about the cycle that it seems like we can't escape. Yeah. And it's a cycle that Oedipus is kind of going through backwards. And so he begins life on 3 feet. As a man, he's on 2. And as an adult, he has 4 feet because now he's blinded himself. He has to be led around. He's actually more helpless than he was even as a child.
Yeah. So, I mean, that what you just said about being unable to escape the cycle kind of segues very nicely into, this is something a lot of people may not know, the other riddle of the Sphinx. So some accounts, she has 2 riddles, and some it's this one that I'm about to tell you instead of the one we just talked about that everybody knows. And it goes like this. There are 2 sisters. One gives birth to the other, and she in turn gives birth to the first. Who are the 2 sisters? And the answer to the riddle, of course, is day and night. And the reason why this works in Greek is because the words for day and night, imera and nix, are feminine gender, grammatically feminine gender.
And or goddesses.
In Greek. Or goddesses, right, exactly. And so the idea is that day gives birth to night, night gives birth to day. And so what is this? This is this never-ending cycle. And I mean, this, I like this riddle as an image of this Oedipus story because it is about this endless, inescapable cycle, but it's also about birth and children and death and all this kind of stuff going on at the same time. So there's, I don't know, I think it's cool the way that you can kind of plug in different riddles into the story and it works that actually aren't in the play. And yet, so who knows what the people actually sitting there in Athens,
right,
what they might have been thinking of. There might have been a set of 20 different riddles that people would have known of that were the riddle of the Sphinx. You know, these are the couple that we know about. So yeah, I mean, what is like the true riddle of the Sphinx? I mean, it is Oedipus himself. I think is what it in some level it comes down to, is that the riddle is not solving a bit of wordplay. It's being confounded by life
and death,
and death, by the gods. So yeah, okay. Well, before we wrap up here, let's go ahead and have a look at the
chat has been real active.
Yeah, one person took so Daring Hobbit. You must be
took some umbrage.
Yeah, a Daring Hobbit must be a
contradiction in terms, an oxymoron.
Well, why am I blanking on the one family from the
Tukes?
Yeah, the Tukes. That's it. Why can I not think? Well, you know, yeah.
Wow. If you want to know more about Tolkien, Father Andrew, there's a great podcast called the Amun Sul podcast.
I know. I've heard of it a couple times.
You should check it out.
So Daring Hobbit takes umbrage with my comments about the American Revolution, saying your view of the American Revolution sounds like a very postmodern interpretation. It says nothing of fleeing for religious persecution, government persecution without representation, or human rights. And then human rights based on the Christian tradition, no less. So, I mean, what I would say to that is, I mean, number one, fleeing religious persecution is not what the revolution is about, historically. The Pilgrims came here not as revolutionaries, but as colonists, right?
The revolution happens a good bit later.
Yeah, the revolution is much later. Now, you could say, okay, taxation without representation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is that a Christian principle? I'm not saying I'm against that, but like, is that a Christian principle? There should be no taxation without representation. That's a little, I don't know.
So.
But here's the other thing that I'll say. I know you got a lot of things to say here, but I will at least say, and this actually connects with something someone else asked. Like, is there no? I can't remember exactly what, but is there no case in which you should ever rise up against your bishop or something?
No, it's the same. It's the same listener is the one.
Same person. Okay.
He said. Point. I don't have a problem with the comments on obedience. More so at the beginning. And he goes on. He say, a question for the host, though semi-related, and then he says exactly the thing that you said that people always say when you say we should obey our bishops by default. He says, is revolution ever warranted? By the way, Daring Hobbit, thanks for commenting. We're not picking on you. I do have bones to pick, but. I will pick them.
Is revolution ever warranted?
Should we always obey the bishop no matter what? No conditions ever. Well, no. I mean, that
no one says that.
Yeah, no one says.
But here's the thing: like, there is no place in Scripture or in Christian tradition that says, rise up and kill your king.
Nope.
It's not a thing.
Nope.
And there's also no place where we are given warrant to simply decide, well, I know better than the bishop. Here's how it works if your bishop tells you to do something sinful. Because that's possible.
Sure.
It's possible. Here's how it works. Number one, God is going to take care of that bishop. God is going to hold that bishop to account. But if you believe that the bishop is telling you to do something sinful, and you're like, I can't obey that. I can't obey that, Your Grace. Then you respectfully and honorably can say that to him. I cannot do that. But then, this is what the saints do, you accept the consequences of that disobedience.
Yes.
And if you suffer for the truth, that is to your glorification.
Right.
Like, that makes you a confessor or
Look
a
at
martyr,
the life
maybe.
of Saint Nectarios.
Right.
If
Or
you
Saint
wanna-
Maximus. Or, I mean,
Maximus or
it's not like, let's throw down the bishop.
right.
God will throw down the bishop.
Yeah.
God will
And
take care of
ultimately, Saint Maximus, Saint Nectarios, vindicated. Not always in
That's
their
right.
own lifetimes, but vindicated.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
why
Saint
we call them
Nectarius
saints.
definitely not in his own lifetime.
Yeah. You know who's not?
Definitely not.
Martin Luther.
Yeah. Yeah. So revolution is just not, because what does revolution do?
Right.
Number one, it's usurping the place of God.
Right.
Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Right. But also what it does is it actually rips apart your society. You know, it kills the family.
And one of the consequences of having this revolutionary attitude, which says I must always treat everything that my bishop tells me with a hermeneutic of suspicion, or that says, you know, one of the problems of having this revolutionary attitude is that what you're saying is that ultimately you're the person who gets to decide what's true and what's false, what's good and what's bad, what you do or don't do. Now, the real bone I have to pick, though, is that this is in any way a postmodern opinion.
Right.
So this is not even remotely postmodernism.
This is the opposite.
Which would be the idea. It would simply be something like, you know, the idea that you know, things are kind of relative, or we're looking at the American Revolution through like some kind of a Marxist lens. This is the opposite of a postmodern. This is a pre-modern.
This is hierarchy
way of approaching things, which is to say that you know, God ordains governments, God ordains kings. You know, God gives us the rulers that we need for our salvation, even if that means, you know, St. Paul saying you should be praying for the civil authorities. Well, who are the civil authorities? It's the Emperor Nero, who's going to behead St. Paul. Like, those are the civil authorities. And St. Paul does not say rise up and overthrow them. Now, obviously, we have the country that we have, and but I mean, surely you can see how the revolutionary spirit is continuing to work out its way out in just American politics today. Think about, and it doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on. I'm not advocating for a political party here, but just think about the way in which we speak as though there are functionally two countries. And what I mean by that is when your guy is in power, and the previous administration did something really bad in some part of the world, we don't say, oh yeah, America made a mistake here. We say, oh no, that was that other administration. As though there's actually no continuity between who that government is and who we are, and no continuity between, you know, and so we talk about it like there's two countries, and it's because we have a little mini revolution, or we try to. We have a little mini revolution every few years. You know, thank God most of the time these, you know, changes of power are peaceful. I don't want to, I mean, I love my country. You know, I'm very happy to live where I live. But this is not a postmodern understanding. And that's what I want to say. And if there's anything that is hard, probably the hardest challenge for, you know, like the biggest, let's say the biggest challenge posed by the convert surge, quote unquote, right, is for us to learn obedience first. Obedience as the default, right? Unless we're really clearly being asked to violate one of the commands of Scripture, one of the commands of Jesus Christ, or one of the canons of the church. obedience by default.
Yeah, I mean, the apostles, what did they say? They said we must obey God rather than men.
Yeah.
But then they also accepted exactly what happens to them when they did that.
They didn't lead a political revolution. They were beaten and thrown in prison.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. There were a lot of
getting political here.
I know. Well, I mean, ultimately, like we're not putting forth any kind of political theories or preferences or anything like that.
I'm not saying, by the way, I want to be super clear. I'm not saying overthrow the United States government and institute a monarchy. Again.
Yeah, no. Right,
I'm not saying that either. Like,
the truth is that we can be faithful in whatever government situation we're in. And indeed, the church has always done that.
Yeah.
It's the problem of killing your father, both in the literal and the metaphorical sense.
Right.
So
the trick to do, I would say, if to be a good American and an Orthodox Christian, is to figure out how do you go down into Hades and bring your father back.
Yeah.
Like, how do you rescue your father? How do we take what we've been given, our inheritance as this country, and kind of own up to the sins that we've had, and then also figure out, like, how do we take what's good about this and redeem it for the glory of God, and make America holy.
Yeah, exactly. So, we're not going to say again because
no, I didn't say again. I just make America holy.
Just make America holy.
Like, full stop.
Period. Exactly.
All right, so there's a lot of. Let's see here.
A lot about this stuff, actually.
Yeah.
Why don't we go ahead and wrap it up? I want to just present this, and maybe this will kind of help segue us into our next episode a little bit. I think we can meditate more on this question of, is Oedipus a plaything of the gods? I think we can keep going on that. We don't need to work that out today because I think we've already had a lot of good conversation. But I did want to leave us with this. So we got an email from actually my neighbor here in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania, Dr. Nico Tatalias. And Dr. Nico, number one, thank you very much for writing in. I love your emails, all of them. You used to send them to us when we did Em and Sewell. You send great ones now, so thanks. And I should mention, by the way, everybody, that Dr. Nico... he's the writer behind a new podcast called Magda Stories, actually. So he's writing some fictional stuff. So you guys should check that out as soon as you can. So this is what he says. This is part of his email. We're going to go over more of it next time. He says, I'm sure you plan to discuss the intuition from Dr. Patristic in The Ethics of Beauty. And this is the money quote. This is really great. That Christ heals Oedipus by instead dying for his father while keeping his mother a virgin.
So I do, in fact, intend to discuss this.
I know you love that book.
One of the main purposes of my life is to sell copies of The Ethics of Beauty. And I am fairly certain, I know I have personally sold more than 50 copies of that book. I know that for a fact. And I suspect the actual number is much higher. So I'm fairly certain I've sold more copies of it than Dr. Timothy has. And yeah, it's a phenomenal book, and I do actually intend to talk about that some next episode. So yeah, stay tuned. Which means I have to actually unpack my copies of The Ethics of Beauty, which are somewhere up there in the loft. Still haven't unpacked all the books after the flood, but yeah, I mean, this is. So this kind of brings me actually to the thing that I wanted to say to kind of key off of what you said right at the very beginning and maybe wrap up our episode. Yeah. So the context of the Dionysia, right? To just go back to this, I'm sorry for harping on this. It's just what I've been thinking about this week. The context of the Dionysia is this attempt to escape the burden of time. It's the attempt to escape the burden of the human condition. And one of the ways that we do that is by catharsis, by sort of seeing it play out in somebody else's life at a safe distance from ourselves, so that we can kind of feel some release at the end, which is why it always ends in, body humor. Imagine, by the way, the whiplash actually of going from this to then it's like a bunch of like frat boy humor, like,
dirty jokes and stuff.
Dirty jokes. When we read mystical commentaries on the Divine Liturgy, like St. Maximus Confessor's Ecclesial Mystagogy or St. Germanus of Constantinople's mystical commentary on the Divine Liturgy. This in the ancient world, this was actually the preferred way of talking about the Divine Liturgy, was to see it through this mystical lens. And this really fell out of favor in modern times. Famously, Father Alexander Schmemann, may his memory be eternal, had no patience for this kind of understanding of the liturgy. But it is the main way that people talk about and write about the Divine Liturgy in the ancient church. And I think that I want to be really careful here about not saying it's just another ancient mystery cult, right? It's not just another, Christianizing Dionysius or something like that. But ancient people understood that a ritual had the capacity to take you through time, to somehow try to escape from the time that you were in, and to do that through somebody else's life. And it's kind of in this context that I think we should read these mystical commentaries on the Divine Liturgy. So St. Maximus the Confessor, he reads the Divine Liturgy on at least 4 levels, one of which I don't understand, so I won't even try to talk about it. But the other 3, that in the Divine Liturgy, the whole history of salvation is recapitulated. So when the bishop is vested, or when the priest puts on his vestments, it's the same prayers. It's the incarnation. God becomes man, and there's like a nice little chiasmus there, because when we're vesting a bishop, or when a priest is putting on his vestments, he's a man putting on the glory of God, right? But in the incarnation, God puts on our nature. He puts on humanity. God takes a body. And then step by step through the Divine Liturgy, it's the story of the whole story of salvation. It actually begins at Vespers, the night before, with the creation of the world. But it's the whole story of the economy of salvation playing out. So much so that the reading of the gospel and the dismissal of the catechumens, St. Maximus says, corresponds to the Last Judgment. Which means that everything that happens in the Divine Liturgy after the dismissal of the catechumens, which is about midway through the service, concerns actually the life of the age to come. So there's that level the liturgy happens at. There's obviously the sort of just the basic practical level of we need to move bread and wine from point A to point B, and people are coming to church, and we need to commune so many people today, and but then there's the personal level at which all of this happens, which is in my own life, Christ becoming incarnate. In my own life, learning to strive to obey and be conformed to the commandments of Christ, which are like the troparia and the epistle reading. In my own life, there's a moment that I'm standing before Christ as the just judge, right? And Christ is saying, enter into my joy or depart from me, right? In my own life, all of these things are happening, and that the time of your life is the time of the Divine Liturgy, and that the time of human, that all of human history. And so this is what Christianity does, is it takes this Greek idea of time that is sealed, and instead it directs it upward. It's not linear, but it's sort of a spiral. And so that we have this opportunity to participate in the whole of history, and that through our mystery, through the Christian mysteries, we are able to escape the hell of perpetual, endless time with no end, with no hope, with no resurrection, as our life is caught up into the life of God. And so I think that certainly on ancient grounds, that reading, that understanding of the Divine Liturgy, which is, as I said, seems to be kind of the primary understanding of the fathers of the church. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I think it really helps us kind of understand what's going on in the case of why would somebody write a play like this? Why would it have been performed? Why would people have liked it enough to copy it and write it down and do it over and over again? But then also ultimately, how does this have its fulfillment in the resurrection?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that line, that thought that Dr. Nico gave us, which is that Christ heals Oedipus. You know? It's powerful. Powerful. Well, thanks for tuning in today to meditate with us on one of the most awful but most intriguing stories from human history. If you were edified by this conversation, please like, subscribe, share, review, all the things. This show's home is right here on YouTube, but we are also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all the other places.
If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure that you click the little bell when you subscribe so that you get notified every time we put out a new episode, which will be twice a month. For our next episode, we're continuing our hot Theban summer with Oedipus at Colonus.
Farewell, and may you always trace the silhouette of virtue in everything that you read.
This has been a listener and viewer-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.